Hello, everybody. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started on chapter 2. All right. All right. So we're going to go over chapter 2's kind of general arguments. And then as we get through this, I'll kind of add some tidbits in, but this at least has kind of your overarching themes. All right. So this whole chapter was about social learning and social cognition. So we're talking about how we learn things through watching other people, maybe, or through reading a book, or through our parents teaching us. There are all sorts of different ways we learn things in society. And we're going to kind of talk about some of these things and talk about some terms. And there's going to be a lot of terms in this chapter, so I apologize for that. And then going into chapter 3, we're going to talk kind of about brain chemistry and how the brain functions and the nervous system and the limbic system when it comes to your emotions and your cognitive processes. Okay, so we're going to kind of just get a general understanding. Now, we're not going deep into neuroscience or anything, so we're grazing the surface here a little bit, but it'll help us to kind of understand how we interact or how we learn how to interact as we go through more modules on specific topics or specific places that we do social interactions. Okay, all right. All right. So again, it's just this chapter specifically is talking about how we perceive, interpret, and predict social behaviors. And we'll kind of get more into the different ways we do that as we go through this. So social cognition involves this understanding or this prediction that we do. It's the process in our brains that says, this means this, or that's the color red, or even so simply as a smile means, okay, they're not mad at me, right? Because they're smiling at me. And it's very cultural. It's understood in many different dynamics. And so we're going to kind of go over how we do that, but a general understanding of the brain processes and why they do certain things and react certain ways in certain contexts. Okay, so we have multiple sources of social knowledge. And if we think about that, it's pretty easy to kind of think of a couple off the top of our head, right? So where did we learn how to be a human? Basically, we learn it from, primarily at the beginning stages, we learn it from our family. We learn it from watching siblings or parents. We learn it from our parents telling us no or yes or good job, right? These things are social consequences that happen within that family dynamic that start to help you understand how to be human. And then we move into school. We move into, say, sports events or teams of any kind, into clubs, into social learning at church, maybe, or at, when you get older, you're going to go into university settings, you're going to go into jobs, you're going to go into things in society like when you pass your driver's test, right? You're going to learn those different rules of the road, and you're going to have a different place that's giving you those rules. You're going to have things like laws in society that also do the same thing. All of these are kind of preparing you for how to interact socially within your dynamic. And each one of these becomes a becomes more of like a source of social knowledge, I guess. We could just go with that, but there's another word for it. It'll come to me later. And then again, all of these interactions, all of these people that teach you how to be human, right? All of these settings that teach you how to be humans, they set expectations for you. And these expectations play a role in whether or not we feel like we're meeting them, whether or not we're going to influence other people by using them or not using them, whether or not we're going to break them because we don't agree with that particular societal expectation, right? There's always counter to any societal expectation. So say you have the ideal body image, right? That's a good example of a societal role expectation here in the US that has received a lot of pushback, and rightfully so, because it was, especially for women, a unrealistic goal for, I don't know, the vast majority of women in the United States. And so being able to say, hey, not all of us are 6'2", pencil thin, and, you know, blonde, white, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And being able to say, hey, we can push back against this expectation and maybe make a different one. That's how we kind of learn and change and shape society's social learning. Okay. And we'll get more into that as we move forward in modules in the course. All right. So again, all of this comes back to understanding and predicting behaviors, because we can't socially interact with other people if we don't A, know how to do that, or B, be able to read or perceive kind of those information. And a lot of that comes to how we learn how to read body language, how we learn how to read facial expressions, how we learn how to, based on the way someone's talking to us, or based on the tone or the loudness or the authority or the particular social roles. Maybe there's an authority figure, right, in a classroom, like a teacher, that's going to have a certain kind of presence comparatively to the students in the classroom, where you would know that that person is the teacher based on where they're standing in the room or how they're directing class. All of these things help us to form these social cognition and understand and be able to predict how these things are going to go in the future. All right, so the book talks about 3 different kind of ways we learn. And this is really breaking it down again. So after this module, we might talk about this a little, but we're really going to get into less about how we're learning it or this particular 3 things. And we're going to talk more about the overall implications, right? What we're learning, how we're then interacting based on what we're learning. But you have 3. Associative learning is really linking objects to emotions, right? So you're linking specific object, event, a person becomes linked to a specific emotional response. So like if you like the beach and you see the ocean, no matter if it's in a picture or you're stepping foot there, there's a little bit of happiness that comes over you, because that has been conditioned in your brain to think ocean, association, happiness, right? It's as simple as that, but it does it over and over and over and over again with many, many, many different inputs. So then you have operant learning, which is just, again, I did this thing, it got me this particular response. So that is now noted as societally acceptable or not. So I have done these things. Maybe, okay, for an example, say you have a toddler, little boy, right? And he is learning to use the restroom, but he misses the toilet. So yay for we went potty, but we kind of missed the expectation there. And so they're going to learn based on the parents' input that they give back. Wait a minute, that's not where I'm supposed to do this. And slowly but surely, they're going to cognitively learn, and they're going to particularly use this in a way that helps them form the association with, I need to go to the bathroom like this, or I need to do this way. This is a societal expectation of me from here until the end of time, right? And then there's observational learning, which is very clearly we watch others constantly, and then we kind of try to fit into whatever it is that they're doing. And this comes into like anytime you're in a group, or say anytime you're at a pep rally, and so then you're following the lead when they tell you, okay, now say this, and then everybody chants the same word, right? This is doing something in repetitive motion, or watching everybody else around me say, oh, okay, so this is what I do. And we do a lot of that, social peer pressure and friends, and in any dynamic, even watching our parents, right? There's a reason the little kids will pick up the baby doll and carry it around the house, especially if they have younger siblings. They've watched mom do it, they've watched dad do it, and now look, this is what they're doing as well, right? This is continuing that observational learning and then putting it into practice. And we just did all this. All right. So I'm going to go through this because I did not realize that I had even more examples here. But again, I will talk about this. Operant learning again is a reminder that I did this action. This action got me a particular consequence, whether positive or negative, and it has reinforced whether I should do it or not do it. And that's kind of what these are saying. We know that association is linking those objects or emotions to a specific event, a person, a place, a thing, etc. Again, like you see that particular classroom, and you know because of those objects that is a school. And you know that because over and over and over again, you've seen desks inside a classroom. All right. So as we get into more, we've talked about observational learning. That's pretty spot on with its name. But there are also things that affect how we see what we're observing. Okay. So we have internal biases. We have certain kinds of modeling that influence whether or not it is effective in what we're learning is actually true or accurate or right. And I will explain this a little more as we go forward. There's also cultural implications when it comes to observational learning. So if you go over into, say, a country where smiling is not something that you do around individuals you just met, and then you go up super smiley because you're trying to, make a good first impression, that may culturally set you back a notch unintentionally, just because those two cultures' facial expressions for how you interact in that moment are not the same, right? And that can happen in a number of different ways, right? It's the same with physical touch. When you first meet somebody in multiple different countries, that's going to look different. And we're going to talk too about gendered roles here in a minute, as part of that also changes. Now, I will remind you that just like culturally, gender is learned through a series of, again, we attempt to do something and we are told that is not what a girl does or what a boy does, or this is what you're not supposed to do, or you need to act like this, or sit ladylike, or put that tie on, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of these things and all these little inputs have taught you how to be a specific gender. And those little things then impact are different based on whatever culture you're in, right? So like what colors you're allowed to wear, what emotions you're allowed to express, what jobs you're allowed to do. All of these things have gender dynamics that are very, very cultural. And because they change, we know they're not innate. We know they're not simply biological. And that's something that we have learned over the course of social science. Okay. All right. So schemas are these mental frameworks. They're like that snap thing in your head that triggers associations, and they make it so that you can process a crap ton of information really, really quickly. Now, the problem with this is that sometimes we form schemas that are not always perfect, or they might fit a particular stereotype, not intentionally, but it's something maybe we've seen over and over and over again in a media source. So that's the schema that we've come up for this type of person, or this type of cultural element, or this type of holiday, or this type of event. And then we interact with these kind of people, or we're at this event, and suddenly we have to reshape our schema. And sometimes that happens and sometimes that doesn't. And that's kind of what we're going to get into in this next part. So an accommodation is really changing those schemas because we've got in that new information. So a lot of college is changing schemas, right? We have all these things set out for us in our general education. Hold on. And then we come in and we're like, okay, but wait, there's more. Most of college is the, oh, wait, but there's more. And it's really changing those schemas to understand the, oh, wait, there's more part, that allows us to really expand on a topic, that allows us to critically think, that allows us to view the world around us. Now, sometimes doesn't always work. And sometimes we choose the path of least resistance, or we try to assimilate that new information into this idea we already have, whether it's right or wrong. And we can see that fairly commonly in, say, cultural differences, right? So there's a lot of stereotyping that is done. And if a new piece of information doesn't necessarily fit into the stereotype, we sometimes have this tendency to be like, okay, wait a minute, you're the exception, but the stereotype still fits. Or, well, you kind of still fit it. So maybe this is still accurate, instead of trying to evaluate what we may have known before. And sometimes that gets us into trouble in our society and within our social interactions. And again, you'll learn that more as we're talking about it in future modules. All right. So again, when we're trying to do nothing but reinforce those pre-existing beliefs, we don't leave room for challenging our own biases, challenging our own inexperience, even. Right. So you go into a job and you think you know how to do that job all the way, but you're in a new company, in a new setting, and you don't want to learn, say, a new software program. And by doing that, you're setting yourself up for a situation where you can't be as effective at a certain skill as you could have been had you decided you were going to accommodate that new information, the new way of doing things. Does that make sense? All right. So several things influence our expectations and our social judgments. Um, we use expectations as kind of filters, right? So we can make snap judgments based on if somebody is interacting the way we feel like they should in a social circumstance, so that we can either maybe perceive them as a threat or not a threat, or perceive them as approachable or not approachable, or we could perceive them as, hey, this person is not doing what they're supposed to, so maybe I need to give them a frowny face or a concerned look as a social consequence, so that they can maybe understand that that's not accurate. And then on the same time, sometimes, if somebody, like, I don't know, waves at you and you wave back, you're giving them the social expectation that, hey, you're doing the right thing. And so you're constantly using these filters and these expectations as filters, so that way, as you're interacting with the world, you don't have to analyze every situation as new. It's your brain's way of shortcutting some of the social interactions. All right. So cognitive accessibility just refers to, again, that schema, or that expectation that can be brought to the mind quickly. So it's, hey, I'm in this situation. I'm in a classroom. So I know I have to do X, Y, and Z because my kindergarten teacher and my first grade teacher and all the way through have always said X, Y, and Z is the way you interact with the classroom. It's going to give you the less stress about certain aspects of whatever social interaction you are in, because it's something quick and easy that you can bring up to your brain and know exactly what you're trying to accomplish. All right. And then salience. Salience is just how prominent certain characteristics are, and things that consistently, again, stand out in social context. And these, again, are going to be things that, like, over and over and over again, statistically, my brain has said that waving at a person, as I'm driving by, is the thing I'm supposed to do. So that is what I do. I do this because, despite some of the times it not being rewarded with that positive wave back, right? I do that because of the salience of the concept, right? Primarily, I get more waves back than I don't. And sometimes I get not good looks if I don't do it. So in order to keep that schema, to keep that expectation alive in my head, I'm going with the overwhelming majority of the time, which is that I get that wave back or that positive thing, head nod, whatever, that allows me to say, hey, yes, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. All right. So cognitive biases impact us greatly when we're talking about social interaction. It's we can self-affirm our own biases by making sure that the maybe media sources we're using consistently reiterate, right? When we're assimilating that same information over and over and over again into the exact same stereotype or that same schema that we have put a person or a place or a thing in. And we see this a lot. A good example, okay, a good example of this that doesn't include people, right? Because we'll get into biases and discrimination and that kind of thing in a later module. But a good example of this is we see a lot of negative input for a long time on pit bulls, on any kind of the bully breed dogs, right? Now, I have one, and she is the most emotionally needs comfort dogs I've ever had in my life. And I've had a lot of very different kinds of dogs. And most of them are just as kind as every other kind of dog, right? However, we've been formed these schemas over and over and over again, and we've created in some people this schema that this kind of breed is dangerous. They are going to bite you. They're more likely to cause damage. They're more likely to attack, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And once that has happened, that bias comes in. And so maybe when you see that dog at the dog park, you give it a lot more room than you would, say, a golden retriever if it came waddling up to you, or see a stray on the street, right? And you see this little Yorkie, you're going to maybe check for a collar or see if it's lost. But maybe if you see that pit bull, you might not do the same thing. Now, does that make that schema accurate? Not always. But does it create it? Is it created by essentially a feedback loop of information? Probably. And so one of the things that we need to do as social sciences and as just individuals in our society is constantly kind of check our schemas and see if they're as accurate as we want them to be, or see if they need to grow a little, or we need to accommodate more information. And again, part of that is why you're in this class, right? Or in any class for that matter, is that you're trying to get yourself more information so that you can create schemas that are as accurate as you possibly can. All right. So again, we've talked about a lot of these things, and I'm kind of giving examples instead of just reading the slides because A, I know you guys can read, and B, because I think it puts it more into perspective if I give you an example than it does if I just kind of read the slides. So when we're talking about this, we're talking specifically about, again, those snap judgments, which you're going to see a lot of things that overlap, right? Or have similar words. So the difference between a schema and this is that a schema is like a full understanding of something. Like you see a pit bull in your brain, you're going to see the color, the face shape, the ears, the nose, the tail, the body build, etc. Okay. You're going to be able to process and give your brain's going to give you way more information than just with this quick snap judgment of this particular case. Okay. So this is not quite the same thing. In the sense that this is like, hey, stoplight means stoplight's red, or stop sign's red, stop. Like this is like instant, right? It's an instant thing that doesn't give you time to like super think about it. But it is useful in navigating really complex social situations, because if you're doing that for part of the things, right? And you can check off, say, again, you're walking in that classroom. Let's use the classroom example. So you know what a classroom example is, a class, and you can feel that schema working in your brain already. But if you walk in and say the classroom is all wood on the sides of the walls or something, or that has paneling or something, I don't know. Your schema is going to be skewed a little because your schema has already dictated everything that's out there. If it might have tables instead of desks, and these quick little judgments are going to say, okay, but it's doing the same thing, or okay, but that's just a wall. These snap judgments are going to be able to allow you to process anything that may not work in the particular schema, if that makes sense. And so that way you're still focused on, yes, I'm still in the right space. Yes, I'm still in a school. Yes, I'm still in a classroom. Um, Basically, it's those snap judgments that allow you to handle any kind of minor change, or sometimes it's major, but it's like one specific thing, if that makes sense. All right. Um, and again, this will lead to the same thing when we're talking about people and fitting into a stereotype or not fitting into a stereotype. You're going to have a schema in your head that may or may not be a stereotype, right? About a certain person or about how they're supposed to interact. And then something doesn't fit or something does fit. Well, it's the stereo, but it's a stereotype. But this person's still doing that. So is the stereotype right then? Or is the stereotype wrong? These are little things that you can make snap judgments on, right or wrong, and can either affirm your schema, can help you move past something that's a discrepancy. Again, this gets back to those original ways we learn. Okay, right? Those accommodation versus assimilation. We're either going to make that snap judgment and let it fit into a schema that may or may not fit into it, or we're going to accommodate maybe the schema needs to grow in perspective just a little bit. All right. And again, the availability is going to be how frequent this particular minor judgment has to be made about a specific thing in order to make it where we need to change our overarching schema. Okay. So say we keep running into these college classrooms and they consistently have tables with chairs instead of maybe the desks like we had in middle school or what have you. This change can override that original schema and say, okay, but in college classrooms, we're now making this schema that says college classrooms have table and chairs instead. Now, will that schema need to be updated again? Possibly, but it is allowing your brain to again make those snap judgments so that it can think about the more important thing, like, hey, somebody just said hi to me. Yes, I need to interact with this person. I don't need to worry about the chairs per se or how the room doesn't look right. It allows you to make those snap decisions. And we'll talk again more about how some of these things might be interrupted by other things happening in the brain process, etc., as we move forward in the course. All right. So again, social cognition and these abilities to make these schemas and then these snap judgments to change our schemas and our ability to learn things really lead to a lot of different things. They lead to how we handle conflict, how we can collaborate with others, whether or not we can make relationships with people, whether or not we can communicate effectively. All of these things kind of help us in this particular element of social interaction, which is really all of it in its various degrees. And so we'll probably come back to social cognition a lot as we move forward in the course, but this is just a very surface level, here's the stuff. Because again, we're not going to go through brain sciences that terribly deep. All right. So again, we also talk about, as we're talking about these schemas, we're also talking about the ways in which these things can work against us, right? So the challenges in eyewitness testimony is a really great example. And study after study have showed that witnesses, to a degree, because again, we're making those snap judgments, right? We're going to see things in a part of a schema. So we may see, for an example, we may see guy in hat. Okay. Our brain, because maybe we've seen a whole bunch of black hats lately, might automatically make that hat on his head black, but it may have been blue, right? Because our brain is trying to form that schema as quickly as possible. And that leaves a whole lot of room for error. And so we're learning that eyewitness testimony is actually fairly inaccurate a lot of the time. And part of making it better is helping to have people describe things to you as opposed to giving them the answer. Were they wearing a black hat? Well, yeah, now I think they were, because now in my schema of that situation or that little snapshot vision that I have made, that makes sense. I mean, they were wearing a hat, so it was probably black. I mean, black hats are popular, right? as opposed to, okay, describe the person to me, and this person describes to a sketch artist or what have you exactly what they look like, and they're giving the color, and they may give it as blue in that particular circumstance because they're not being led to a particular thing. It's the same way you see, like in a lineup, you're going to see a lot of similar faces. Well, it's going to be a lot harder for an eyewitness to um, come up with the right person in a lineup of very similar people than it is when there's vast difference between the people that are in the lineup, if that makes sense. So if you have six guys up there all wearing black hats, right? Maybe a couple are wearing blue, or maybe none of them are wearing hats now. That eyewitness is going to struggle to figure out who or which one of these people it is, especially the longer time has passed, because the schema that they put that person in had a hat on, or that schema had, we were saying, okay, well, as a person with a hat on, well, if you have no one with hats on, then your brain's going to have a hard time trying to put in there the information into the schema that it needs to pull up to make that eyewitness testimony as accurate as possible, if that makes sense. If you have questions about this particular thing and why eyewitness testimony is so hard to get right, shoot me an email. We can always do a class discussion or whatever, because I find this super fascinating. And it's something that as we move towards more AI technology, more things of that nature, I am curious to see how valid eyewitness testimony is going to be considered as we continue on in our legal, as our legal system continues on advancing with other kinds of technology. All right. So again, this chapter is just talking about how we learn things, how we frame things in our mind, why we frame things the way we do, why we're making so many little snap things, and allowing ourselves to see the big picture requires us to have some things that we can push aside, right? That we can't constantly think about every single thing in a situation all the time, because it doesn't allow our brain the ability to then have the cognitive or have the interaction, the social interaction that is part of that. So I hope this helps. If you have any questions, as always, please feel free to contact me, and I will go over whatever it is that you need gone over again.